In the Bible, God speaks to people in a variety of ways, including dreams and visions. And so it was God who was the one behind the dreams of Joseph.
Welcome to Mission 66, your daily journey through God's Word, powered by Bible teacher Dr. Luis Sayao and Transworld Radio. We're currently in the book of Genesis. Want to go deeper? Grab your free study guide at mission66.org. Now let's dive in with our teacher John Matthews and co-host Esther Sisulu.
It's time to embark on our daily study of the 66 books of the Bible, and I'm so pleased to invite you once again to join us in our series in the book of Genesis. Now today we are in chapter 37, and we're starting with the life of Joseph, which of course is one of the sons of Jacob. Now Joseph had a dream, which when he told his family, it really angered them. You know, they thought he was exalting himself as somebody special. Interestingly, he absolutely was. Well, our teacher John Matthews will present the theme, The Dreamer.
Esther, thank you so much. Great to be with you all for this latest episode of Mission 66. As we journey through this world, we have this incredible book of truth, the Bible, that is alive. Ruth Bell Graham once said of it, "Through the years, I turned to the Bible and found in it all that I needed." And this book, the Bible, is the sole focus of Mission 66 as we go through this book of life in its entirety. And in recent days, we've been following Abraham and his descendants Isaac and his son Jacob, who had 12 sons from 4 different women. And now in chapter 37 of Genesis, we come to Joseph, Jacob's son by his most beloved wife, Rachel. And Joseph is one of those people in the Bible about whom nothing bad is written. In fact, his righteousness often got him into trouble. So begins a winding journey that will take him on a path of suffering, ultimately, all the way to the slave markets and the prisons in the land of ancient Egypt. This is chapter 37. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan. And these are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now, to be fair, Joseph appears to be a bit of a talebearer here. We're not told what his brothers had done that was wrong, but Joseph nonetheless tells on them, and this all is a significant part of the story. Verse 3 says, "Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colours. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him." So worth noting, early doors here, the house of Jacob is dysfunctional from the very start. These brothers were from 4 different mothers, so there was little to no brotherly affection at all towards Joseph, as there may have been had they all had the same mother. But Jacob makes it painfully obvious that he favoured Joseph more than the others, and he does that in this instance by giving him this richly coloured decorative robe to wear, something he never gave any of the other brothers. So we could, I think with justification, say Joseph had special treatment, receiving this lavish love of his father, which the other brothers simply didn't experience. So here is favouritism, and that makes Joseph the target of abuse from his envious brothers. Verse 5. "Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told the dream to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, 'Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf. His brothers said to him, Are you indeed to reign over us, or are you indeed to rule over us? So they hated him even more because of his dreams and because of his words. Then he dreamed another dream, and he told that also to his brothers, saying, Behold, I have dreamed another dream. You can imagine what his brothers were thinking at this point. Behold, he said, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. But when he told the dream to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him, saying, What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him. But his father kept the saying in mind. Jacob, also called Israel by now, made the connection that the sun and the moon represented himself and Rachel, and the 11 stars represented Joseph's 11 brothers. So even though the family despised Joseph for his dreams, at least his brothers did, they were valid dreams, and eventually we'd see how they would come true. Verse 12. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. And he said to him, Here I am. And so he said to him, Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a man found him wandering in the fields, and the man asked, What are you seeking? And he replied, I am seeking my brothers. And he said, Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the flock? And the man replied to Joseph, They have gone away, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers, and he found them at Dothan. They, his brothers, saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him, throw him into one of the pits, and then we'll say that a fierce animal devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. But when Reuben heard this, he rescued him out of their hands by saying, Let's not take his life. And Reuben said to them, Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but let's not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father. Now we know that Reuben was no angel. He'd taken one of his father's concubines and had received a curse as a result, but he had this thing in his favour. He wasn't willing to go along with this murderous plot to kill Joseph. But they were still planning to do something else, as we see in verse 23. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colours that he wore, and they took him and they threw him into a pit. Now that pit was empty, there was no water in it. And then they sat down to eat. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry the goods down to Egypt. And then Judah said to his brothers, What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. And the Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up, and they lifted him out of the pit, and they sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And those Ishmaelites took Joseph to Egypt. Now the brothers evidently hadn't told Reuben about their plan, because Reuben probably was planning to go back to the pit whilst they weren't looking and rescue Joseph. But he didn't get there in time. Verse 29. And when Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes. And he returned to his brothers and he said, "The boy is gone, and I, where shall I go?" Then they took Joseph's robe, they slaughtered a goat, and they dipped the robe in the goat's blood. And they sent the robe of many colours and brought it to their father, and they said, "This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." And Jacob identified it, and he said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins, and he mourned for his son many, many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted, saying, "No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son, mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. So here we see Joseph the dreamer winds up being sold for the price of a slave in Egypt by his own brothers, the very ones who you might have thought would have protected him. And that, Esther, is chapter 37 of Genesis.
You're listening to Mission 66, our Bible study chapter by chapter. Today, looking at Genesis 37, at the story of Joseph, his coat of many colors, and his dreams. All right, John. Well, Joseph, his dreams seem to have become a huge nightmare for him and his entire family. And in fact, this story of Joseph reminds me of primary school, when there were certain kids in the class who seemed to always get picked on by the other kids, right? And it was always cruel to me to see this happening. But what was even more cruel was the perpetrators justifying their behavior by saying that these kids deserved the bullying because they were either antisocial or perhaps they were outspoken. Now, I say all of this to say, is there a sense in which Joseph brought this taunting upon himself by his brothers, or the behavior in which his brothers exhibited towards him? Did he deserve it?
Yeah, perhaps you couldn't readily describe Joseph at this point in his life as the master of tact. And, you know, I'm sure many people reading this account might well say that Joseph could have been a good bit more tactful in the way that he related these dreams. You know, Joseph had these brothers who were from different mothers. However, Joseph had no control ultimately over the dreams that he was having. And so we need to see that the dreams were valid because it was God himself who was revealing what was going to happen to him in the coming years. And there indeed, Esther, was going to come a time when the brothers and his father would come bowing to him, and we're gonna see that as this fascinating story unfolds in future episodes.
Now, John, perhaps it might sound as though I'm judging in this moment, but I do want to mention that maybe the blame should fall on Jacob himself, because I think in showing favoritism towards Joseph, he was really setting him up to be abused by his brothers. My thought on this is that a good father would try to make the effort to treat all his children fairly, or perhaps at the very least, he would let each of them know that they're loved and they're appreciated for who they are, even though he might, say, have a favorite.
Yeah, that sounds really sensible to me, doesn't it? And, you know, we all make mistakes, don't we? Fathers, sons, brothers, in the context of this story. And perhaps the brothers wouldn't have dared to pick on Joseph when their father was around to protect him. But when he wasn't, then came this opportunity for mischief. And I think what you've answered that in your question. Had he dealt with that situation differently, maybe they wouldn't have wanted to act towards Joseph in the way that they did. I don't suppose Jacob would have ever foreseen this happening. He wasn't perfect. But I think the major problem that Jacob has here is that he has begun with more than one wife. So the sons don't have the same mother, and so they don't perhaps feel the same brotherly affinity towards Joseph. And so, we realize, don't we, that God tolerates polygamy in the early days of biblical history. But if you follow the results, the truth is wherever we have one man and too many wives, the experience is never positive. The outcome is, it never bears fruit. Even wise old Solomon was brought to grief by his marrying 700 wives, I think it was. So God's perfect order was one man and one woman living in a monogamous relationship until parted by death of one or the other. But this mix of situations creates issues.
Yeah. Yeah, and speaking of brotherly affinity, it's interesting though when we look at verse 27, Judah actually admits that Joseph was their brother, their own flesh, right? So I'm guessing that there must have been some sort of awareness, some sort of brotherly affinity towards him.
Yeah, and I guess certain of the brothers felt more drawn to him than others. So, as is natural, some would have had a closer relationship, as some brothers have closer relationships with other siblings. But the truth is that the brothers, the majority of them, have this murderous intent towards Joseph. And Jesus said, "He who hates his brother commits murder in his heart." Judas saying, look, we shouldn't kill him because after all, he is one of our brothers in this family, but still thinks it's perfectly okay to sell him into slavery to the Midianites. And in the end, they happily sell him for 20 shekels of silver to those wandering Ishmaelites from Midian. So it's a bit of a stretch to say that any of these guys felt any hearts of love towards Joseph. They're still throwing him aside with no care, really, of ever seeing him again.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Now, this article of clothing, we need to talk about it because it really was the source of envy and jealousy from Joseph's brothers. So what was it about this colored coat that the brothers just didn't appreciate?
Yeah, good question. Well, let's put it into the context of the time, because in ancient times, a piece of clothing was of greater value than it is today. They didn't or couldn't just go shopping at the mall, and clothing was very often handmade from sheepskins or furs, so not easy to acquire. And people at that time, they usually have one or two changes of clothes, and that would be it. And so this robe that Joseph gets, according to the Hebrew texts, we understand that it's something that's extra long, it's really colourful, unusually beautiful, probably very expensive. And it clearly reveals Jacob's preference among his sons. It's not hard to spot that one has this gorgeous coat and no one else does. So it stirs up this jealousy from the others who don't have a special coat like Joseph. And so this animosity that is already bubbling away is then compounded with the arrival of this special coat. So that's the scenario. Let's make no mistake about it. It still is very wrong of the brothers to do what they did, but this is the scenario at this stage in the story.
All right, now these dreams that Joseph had were obviously significant, right? And they were kind of a foreshadowing for the future. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, you are. And, in the Bible, God speaks to people in a variety of ways, and that included dreams and visions. And it was God who was the one who was behind these dreams that Joseph had had. God had this specific plan to preserve the lives of his people, which he was revealing to Joseph. Now, the only thing is he didn't reveal the details of how the result was going to come about. The dreams didn't warn Joseph, for example, that he was going to be thrown into a pit, sold into slavery to the nomads. The dream only reveals the outcome, the final result, which, as we will see, comes true in forthcoming episodes.
John, can we trust our dreams? Well, I suppose we can trust them, but should we trust our dreams?
Well, we can't discount the possibility that God may be speaking to us through dreams, but we'll have to admit that most of our dreams don't really make an awful lot of sense. They may, on rare occasions, hint at some hidden preoccupation with an event or way of living. They also may hint at the stress that this preoccupation causes us deep in our hearts. But most experts would largely agree that dreams don't mean or indicate anything specific. Now, the patriarchs of old, and even actually the prophets, disciples and the apostles, they didn't have the complete Bible back then. We now do. So, look, God can speak through dreams, but remember, not every single dream that we have is significant, nor is it a revelation from God. But in Joseph's case, here in this story, it is.
Right. So another connection that was made from Old Testament to New Testament, I've actually heard it said that Joseph in Genesis is some type of foretelling of Jesus Christ.
Clearly, Joseph is in no way equal to Christ, but there are, you're right, parallels in the lives of the two, because both were first humbled, then later exalted. Both were sold by somebody close to them. Joseph was sold for 20 pieces of silver. Jesus was betrayed by Judas for 30 pieces. Both went into Egypt and they returned from Egypt. And as we look actually ahead at Joseph's life, the parallels increase because both resisted temptation. Jesus was perfect, and Joseph was one of those Bible characters about whom nothing bad is written. Both were falsely accused. Both were separated from their fathers. Both were found alive after being believed dead. And eventually both are reunited with those who are close to them, and they forgive those who mistreated them. And there are other parallels between Joseph and Jesus, and we'll get to those as we continue through the book of Genesis and this story of Joseph.
Well, I'm looking forward to those studies, John. So we've come to the end of this lesson. So how should we summarize this chapter?
Yeah, let's do that. So Genesis 37 contains the story of Joseph outlining these significant dreams. The dreams indicate that one day his entire family would come bowing down to him. Now, at the beginning, the opposite is happening. Jacob's favouritism is resulting in terrible feelings of jealousy from his brothers, and that turns into a murderous plot to get rid of him one way or another. And they end up finally selling him as a slave to a travelling band of Ishmaelites who are travelling to Egypt. And then they take this fabulous coat of many colours, they dip it in blood, and they deceive their father Jacob by telling him that a wild animal has killed his favourite son. The brothers reckon they got away with it, but they're going to be in for a huge surprise. Meantime, we'll look at chapter 38 next time. Now, that actually has nothing, Esther, to do with Joseph, but it indicates the kind of trickery and double dealing that was going on in the lives of some of Joseph's brothers. Now, chapter 38 is going to look like and seem like a contrast between the immorality and hypocrisy of the brother Judah and the righteous conduct of Joseph, even whilst he was working as a slave in the house of Potiphar, who was the Egyptian army officer. And that is where we're going to pick the story up when we return. Please join us for that on Mission 66. This dramatic story will suggest that at times reality is stranger than fiction.
Well, thanks, John. And indeed, we'll have to pick the story of Joseph up as we continue in further chapters of Genesis. Thank you so much for joining us, dear friend. I'm Esther for John Matthews and our team members saying, until we meet again, this is Mission 66.
Let me remind you to head on over to mission66.org to download your study guide. It's free. Dive deeper into the Bible teaching of John Matthews and learn how it all relates to your Christian walk. Tag along with John and Esther on our Bible road trip episode by episode. Your study guide's waiting for you at mission66.org. That's where you can also post your questions or make a comment, and even help out with a donation to keep Mission 66's heart beating around the world. Hop on over to mission66.org. Mission 66 is a partnership of TWR and the ministry of Dr. Luis Sayao.